All right, welcome back to Roll of Thunder. We're on chapter 2. It's a much shorter chapter. I think we've met lots of the characters, and so now the story, we've learned a lot about the setting, so the story's going to start to develop a little bit more. I'm going to read out loud, and I'm going to annotate as I go. I want you to make the annotations I do, but also if you come across words that you think are interesting or don't know, or other parts you have questions about or stand out, please add your own. Cassie, you better watch yourself, girl, Big Ma cautioned, putting one rough, large hand against my back to make sure I didn't fall. I looked down at my grandmother from midway up one of the wooden poles Papa had set out to mark the length of the cotton field. Big Ma was Papa's mother, and like him, she was tall and strongly built. So we're learning a little bit about Big Ma here. Her clear, smooth skin was the color of pecan shell. "Ah, Big Ma, I ain't gonna fall," I scoffed, then climbed onto the next strong spike and reached for a fibrous puff at the top of the tall cotton stalk. Fibrous is a good word, so it sounds like she's helping out in the cotton fields. "You sure better not fall, girl," grumbled Big Ma. "Sometimes I wish we had more low cotton like down round Vicksburg. I don't like y'all children climbing them things." She looked around, her hand on her hip. So it sounds like from this that Big Ma is protective. She's very worried about Cassie hurting herself, so she's very protective of her. She looked around, her hand on her hip. Christopher John and Little Man further down the field balanced skillfully on lower spikes of their own poles, plucking the last of the cotton. But Stacy, too heavy now to climb the poles, was forced to remain on the ground. Big Ma eyed us all again. Then, with a burlap bag slung across her right shoulder and dangling at the left side of her waist, she moved down the road toward Mama. "Mary, child, I think with what we picked today, we ought to have ourselves another bale." So sounds like Mama's name is Mary. Mama was stooped over a low cotton branch. She stuffed one last puff into her bag and straightened. She was tawny-colored, thin, and sinewy. These are all describing Mama now. We're learning about her. Make sure you know that word sinewy. It's a good one. With delicate features and a strong-jawed face. And though almost as tall as Big Ma, she seemed somewhat dwarfed beside her. "I expect you're right, Mama," she said. "Come Monday, we'd better haul it up to the Granger place and have it ginned. Then we can—" "Cassie, what's the matter?" I didn't answer Mama. I had moved to the very top of my pole and could now see above the field to the road where two figures, one much taller than the other, were walking briskly. An adverb there. As the men rounded a curve in the road, they became more distinct. There was in the easy, fluid gait of the shorter man a familiarity that made me gasp. I squinted, shadowing my eyes from the sun, then slipped like lightning down the pole. There we have a simile there. "Cassie, it's Papa!" "David?" So Papa's name is David. Mama questioned unbelievingly as Christopher John and Little Man descended eagerly and dashed after Stacy and me towards the barbed wire fence. Okay, we know about their relationship with their dad. They seem excited to see him. "Don't y'all go through that fence," Big Ma called after us, but we pretended not to hear. We held the second and third rows of the prickly wire wide for each other to climb through. Then all four of us sped down the road toward Papa. When Papa saw us, he began running swiftly, easily like the wind. Little Man, the first to reach him, like the wind here is another simile there. Little Man was the first to reach him, was swept lightly upward in Papa's strong hands. As Christopher John, Stacy, and I crowded around. "Papa, what are you doing home?" asked Little Man. Now remember, Papa's usually off working to earn enough money for them to stay, to keep their land and eat. Putting Little Man down, Papa said, "Just had to come home, see about my babies." He hugged and kissed each of us, then stood back. So in this action, you can tell they're all very close. "Just look at y'all," he said proudly. "Ain't y'all something? Can't hardly call y'all babies no more." He turned. "Mr. Morrison, what you think about these children of mine?" Okay, this must be the man that he was walking with. That's a character we don't know yet. In our excitement, we had taken no notice of the other man standing quietly at the side of the road. But now, gazing upward at the most formidable-looking being we had ever encountered, we huddled closer to Papa. So even if I don't know what a formidable-looking being is, If they're huddling closer to Papa, that tells me that it's something intimidating, maybe. Maybe he's large, something about him that this word has to do with not making them comfortable. The man was a human tree in height. That is a metaphor. So he is tall, towering high above Papa's 6 feet 2 inches. The long trunk of his massive body bulged with muscles, and his skin of the deepest ebony was partially scarred upon his face and neck as if by fire. So now we know that he's black. This is some really good imagery here. Really good descriptive language to describe what Mr. Morrison looks like. Deep lifelines were cut into his face, and his hair was splotched with gray, but his eyes were clear and penetrating. I glanced at the boys, and it was obvious to me that they were wondering the same thing as I. Where had such a being come from? "Children," said Papa, "meet Mr. L.T. Morrison." Each of us whispered a faint hello to the giant. Then the 6 of us started up the road toward home. Before we reached the house, Mama and Big Ma met us. When Papa saw Mama, his square, high-cheekboned face opened to a wide smile, and lifting Mama with spirited gusto, he swung her around twice before setting her down and kissing her. Okay. That tells us a little bit about the mom and dad. They're very happy together. "David, is something the matter?" she asked. Papa laughed. "Something got to be wrong, woman, for me to come see about you? You got my letter." He nodded, then hugged and kissed Big Ma before introducing them to Mr. Morrison. Okay, we don't know anything about a letter yet, but I'm guessing that this is what brought him home. Because they're surprised to see him. She's assuming he got this letter, and he said yes. When we reached the house, we climbed the long, sloping lawn to the porch and went into Mama and Papa's room, which also served as the living area. Mama offered Mr. Morrison, so that's a little hint about their house. If their room is also the living area, sounds like even though they own their land, they still have a tight quarters they live in. Mama offered Mr. Morrison Grandpa Logan's chair, a cushioned oak rocker skillfully crafted by Grandpa himself. But Mr. Morrison did not sit down immediately. Instead, he stood gazing at the room. It was a warm, comfortable room of doors and wood and pictures. From it, a person could reach the front or the side porch, the kitchen, and the 2 other bedrooms. Its walls were made of smooth oak, and on them hung gigantic photographs of Grandpa and Big Ma, Papa and Uncle Hammer when they were boys, Papa's 2 eldest brothers who were now dead, and pictures of Mama's family. So reading this description of all these pictures they have in the house, it's telling me that family is important, that they're close to their family, that they're all a part of each other's lives. The furniture, a mixture of Logan-crafted walnut and oak, included a walnut bed whose ornate headboard, ornate's a good word, headboard rose halfway up the wall toward the high ceiling, a grand chiffonier with a floor-length mirror, a large roll-top desk which had once been Grandpa's but now belonged to Mama, and the 4 oak chairs, 2 of them rockers, which Grandpa had made for Big Ma as a wedding present. Mr. Morrison nodded when he had taken it all in, as if he approved, then sat across from Papa in front of the unlit fireplace. The boys and I pulled up straight-back chairs near Papa as Big Ma asked, "How long are you going to be home, son?" Papa looked across at her. "Till Sunday evening," he said quietly. "Sunday?" Mama exclaimed. "Why, today's already Saturday." "I know, baby," Papa said, taking her hand, "but I got to get that night train out of Vicksburg so I can get back to work by Monday morning." Christopher John, Little Man, and I groaned loudly, and Papa turned to us. "Papa, can't you stay no longer than that? Last time you come home, you stayed a week," I said. Papa gently pulled one of my pigtails. "Sorry, Cassie girl, but I can't stay any longer. I might lose my job." "But, Papa—" "Listen, all y'all," he said, looking from me to the boys to Mama to Big Ma. "I come home special so I could bring Mr. Morrison. He gonna stay with us a while." Now we know why Mr. Morrison is there. If Mama and Big Ma were surprised by Papa's words, they did not show it, but the boys and I looked with wide eyes at each other, then at the giant. "Mr. Morrison lost his job on the railroad a while back," Papa continued, "and he ain't been able to find anything else. When I asked him if he wanted to come work here as a hired hand, he said he would. I told him we couldn't afford much, food and shelter and a few dollars in cash when I come home in the winter." All right. So Mr. Morrison lost a job, and he's going to be there as a hired hand. A hired hand is just someone that helps out, that you give money to for helping out. Mama turned to Mr. Morrison, studied him for a moment, and said, "Welcome to our home, Mr. Morrison." "Ms. Logan," said Mr. Morrison in a deep, quiet voice like the roll of low thunder. Oh, wait a minute. Roll of low thunder. The first reference we have to the title of the book. It's also a simile. "I think you ought to know I got fired off my job. Got in a fight with some men. Beat 'em up pretty bad." Mama stared into Mr. Morrison's deep eyes. "Whose fault was it?" Mr. Morrison stared back. "I'd say theirs." "Did the other men get fired?" "No, ma'am," answered Mr. Morrison. "They was white." I think this is another interesting, very telling part, because he got fired, even though they say it's their fault, and the other men didn't, and he just says the reason they didn't get fired, they was white. Like that's enough of an explanation. Nothing else matters. Obviously, they weren't fired. He was, because they were white. Mama nodded and stood, and Mama seems to understand that too. "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Morrison. You're lucky no war's happened, and we're glad to have you here, especially now." It's like a little foreshadowing. I wonder what this means, especially now. Then she turned and went to the kitchen with Big Ma to prepare supper, leaving the boys and me to wonder about her last words. "Stacy, what'd you think?" I asked as we milked the cows in the evening. "How come Papa come home and brung Mr. Morrison?" Stacy shrugged. "Like he said, I guess." I thought on that a moment. "Papa ain't never brung nobody here before." Stacy did not reply. You think it's 'cause of them burnings TJ was talking about?" All right, now we're coming back to the burnings. Remember, they mentioned them in the first chapter. "Burnings," piped the little man, who had interrupted his feeding of the chickens to visit with Lady, our golden mare. "What's burnings got to do with anything?" "That happened way over by Smelling's Creek," said Stacy slowly, ignoring the little man. "Papa got no need to think." His voice trailed off, and he stopped milking. "Think what?" I asked. "Nothing," he muttered, turning back to the cow. "Don't worry about it." All right, now it doesn't say in here, but think for a second what the burnings and what the kids are thinking about it. It sounds to me like Stacy's starting to think maybe it does have to do with the burnings. I glared at him. "I ain't worrying. I just want to know, that's all. And I bet you anything Mr. Morrison come here to do more'n work. Sure wish I knew for sure." Stacy made no reply, but Christopher John, his pudgy hands, fun descriptive words, filled with dried corn for the chickens, and his lower lip quivering, said, I know what I wish. I wish Papa didn't never have to go away no more. I wish he could just stay and stay." So that tells us a little bit about Christopher John, Mrs. Daddy. Mrs. Daddy.